Thank you all for joining and attending. It's been an incredible conference so far over these last few days, and I'm super stoked to introduce Clee Irwin. Irwin Naturals is one of our sponsors for the event and made all of this possible over these few days, these discussions, these abilities to meet with politicians and financiers to really push forward the future of psychedelic-assisted therapy and preventative care. So we're extremely excited to have Clee speaking with us. And I'm going to hand it over to him and educate us on the work that he's been doing. Thank you so much.
All right. Hi, everybody. All right. So I'm Clee Irwin. 28 years ago, we founded a health and wellness company working with herbal nutraceuticals called Irwin Naturals. And over those couple decades, it became a household name brand. And I also work on fundamental physics, where we study the unification of quantum gravity, which is general relativity, with quantum mechanics. But how does that relate to consciousness? So we study that. So obviously, I have a passion for health and wellness, but also the science of consciousness. Now, speaking of consciousness, the level of chaos in the world today may be unprecedented, and it's probably affecting our consciousness, right? And if we had a mental health crisis before this recent upheaval in increased chaos, then it's only made the problem worse, right? Wars and all of the things going on. And it's almost like the perfect storm of bad luck. Pandemics, climate change, wars around the world, and other catastrophes, all compounding to cause a general sense of anxiety and depression. And this is because there are realistic thoughts that you can have about a possible global societal meltdown if we don't change and do something. It can really happen. So being worried about it is what a lot of us are experiencing. I mean, you can see this represented, our collective worry, in the increasing trend toward apocalypse movies, right? Viral apocalypses, nuclear apocalypses, zombie apocalypses, right? It's this sense of worry reflected in our art. Or you can just tune into CNN and watch it unfolding, the unraveling. So what we're all going through has led to what psychiatrists call subclinical PTSD. So most of us have this subclinical PTSD. It's the general fear that our trauma will increase in the years ahead of us. And as I mentioned, it really could increase if we don't take action and change society. But we push that fear out of our minds on a day-to-day basis. We take our kids to school, we go shopping. But the worry is there in the back of our minds, like a splinter, leading to a collective experience of anxiety. So to navigate ourselves away from the edge of this Armageddon cliff, we need high-octane creativity and optimism. But those are the qualities of a healthy mind. And so job number one is to get our minds right, mental health. Talk therapy and a lifetime of Prozac help some people, but not enough to reverse the crisis. So there are more profound treatments that are desperately needed. And thankfully, a sequence of high-level peer-reviewed clinical studies have recently led to a general consensus that psychedelics, such as psilocybin and ketamine, are probably the only way out of the mental health epidemic because of their lasting effects on rewiring the brain. However, a lot of these substances are illegal, and the global emergency is too serious to wait years for psilocybin and other such drugs to be approved by the FDA and various ministries of health around the world. But the psychedelic ketamine is legal now in virtually every country. It's safe, well understood, and it successfully treats many mental disorders. Amazingly, its effectiveness can be in the 80% range. Now, compared to standard treatments, this is as close to a medical miracle as you can get. The World Health Organization even added ketamine to their list of essential medicines. Now, the reason psychedelics work so profoundly is because they are ego disassociatives. They allow us to escape the enslavement of our egos for a few hours, just long enough to see our fears and our beliefs from a fresh perspective, allowing us to let go of the anxiety that plagues us, long enough to have a light bulb go off in our minds, a healthy new realization that can remain with us long after the drug has worn off. The World Health Organization says that 1 billion people are currently suffering from mental health disorders, and that is going to cost the global economy over $6 trillion a year by the end of the decade. Johns Hopkins University says that 1 in 4 adults suffer from one of these disorders, and the number of people suffering is growing. Now, unfortunately, trauma from violence and mental abuse maps roughly to income. So that's a big problem, right? Because that means that those in our society who need help the most are exactly the ones who can least afford it. And insurance companies are generally not covering psychedelics, even the legal psychedelic ketamine. So there are hundreds of millions of people who need this treatment, right? And they don't have access financially to the treatment. And the solution, for us at least, is big brand. So that sounds funny at first, right? But let me explain. Big brands, I believe, need to step into the breach now, immediately, while we're waiting around for the FDA and we're waiting around for insurance companies to do the right thing. Because independent corporations have the ability, if they choose to act in the best interest of the public, like a B Corp concept, where a corporation is kind of psychologically halfway a nonprofit and halfway a for-profit. They're kind of skirting the fence. And so, how do big brands come in to help? Well, at the end of the day, we don't buy products and services. We buy brands, whether it's a personal brand of your yoga instructor, or Apple, or Costco. We buy brands. Household name brands that we love, brands with an aura of trust and authenticity that can embolden people to try something new, something scary, like psychedelic mental health treatment. And there'll be 2 primary brand categories in the psychedelic renaissance. The first are the drug brands. So Johnson & Johnson got ketamine approved for depression by the FDA, and they named their brand of their drug Spravato, but it's essentially ketamine. So anyway, these brands, whether we like it or not, they're going to be part of the psychedelic renaissance. There will be local, grassroots things. It's sort of like I go to a farmer's market on the weekends, and then sometimes I go to Costco. So there's a path for both the local grassroots stuff and the things that come with brand and economy of scale. So anyway, that's one brand category, the drug brands, right? So that's future psychedelic drugs that have not even been approved yet. Spravato is really the first one. And then there's going to be the clinic brands that employ the doctors that the pharmaceutical brands like Johnson & Johnson have to go through in order to access the patients, to get their psychedelic drug brands to patients. So as this new sector of psychedelics emerges, corporations must act at least a little bit like nonprofits in doing the right thing, right? Finding what is best going to serve society. And so speaking of, doing the right thing and the history of corporations not always and not usually doing the right thing and being driven by greed and abusing workers and taking advantage, let me use an amusing metaphor. What if there were a real zombie apocalypse and a couple of us in this room discovered the vaccine, the cure for the zombie apocalypse? We formed a company to sell that drug, the zombie cure drug. So do you think it would be ethical for us to just milk the suffering population with high prices, as high as we can get away with? Because after all, that's legal to sell for what the market will bear. Or would it really not be ethical, considering the zombie apocalypse? Maybe a discount, a zombie discount would be in order because of the sheer magnitude of the emergency. So I think we have to think about the mental health crisis a little bit like a zombie apocalypse. If it gets too far ahead of us and it keeps growing, it can unravel the very fabric of our society, and we'll see glitchy side effects like Americans storming the Capitol building, which was an event that if you told me that was going to happen a year ago, I would have said, well, I think you're watching too many Morgan Freeman Hollywood movies, because that's just unrealistic. And yet it happened, and it's a sign of the anxiety. So how is our corporation, Irwin Naturals, contributing to this crisis? In my corporation, we're publicly traded, but I'm the largest shareholder. So I can use my shares as the majority owner to push my weight around. So I'm using that influence to deploy the power of our brand, this household name, to help people with low income access this life-saving treatment, especially during these early days when the insurance industry is not really stepping up to the plate to provide relief. So major brands like Irwin Naturals, we tend to control vast economies of scale and to have best practices in most things that we do. And these things, best practices and economies of scale, drive down operating costs. And so we can pass those operating costs on to patients, especially low-income patients. But we also have something else to offer that's needed with respect to the psychedelic renaissance and the mental health crisis. And it's this: psychedelics have been demonized for years. So all of us people who can afford to come and participate in this amazing event here in Davos, we're probably amongst the higher income people in society, right? But lower income people, they don't really have the same awareness of this psychedelic opportunity that we do. And so I think that the public needs a little bit of hand-holding to help them feel safe with this breakthrough, because in their minds it's very controversial. In our minds it's just almost becoming just obvious, right? Like no big deal. So for millions of people, this means a trusted brand that serves as that friendly face at a party full of strangers. It's kind of like that familiar company that sends them this message just by being in the space. Hey, we're legitimate and we've safely served your health needs, in our case for 28 years. And psychedelic mental health treatment is also legitimate and safe, and will provide you the healing that you need, right? So we can be there while it's still controversial to sort of hold the hand in the minds of some people. So we are currently doing a roll-up of psychedelic mental health clinics around the world. So if you remember, I mentioned a few slides ago that there will be 2 brands. There'll be the brands of the new pharmaceuticals that will be increasingly approved by various ministries of health around the world, right? And in most countries, those drugs have to go through doctors and their brands, right? Kaiser Permanente is a big brand of hospitals that employ doctors in the United States. So we're doing a roll-up of all of these hundreds of ketamine clinics around the world. There are about 600 of them so far in the United States that are out there, and we're rolling up or merging with many of them. And then there are ketamine clinics also all around the world. So our model is pretty simple. As I mentioned, we use the power of brand and the economies of scale to drive down our operating costs, and that allows us to offer free pro bono services. For example, maybe there's a suicidal, out of work veteran suffering from PTSD. I mean, a discount isn't going to help him. So fine, we'll have an amount in our budget for just pro bono free. And then another person could be a single mom and she's making $35,000 a year and she's got anxiety and she can't afford the full price, so we give her a discount. So we need to create the bubble of money through driving down operating costs and then passing on a good chunk of those savings to the patients who are suffering. So, what does the world look like, right? In my optimistic vision, after this sea change that is the psychedelic renaissance occurs in the $1.5 trillion mental health sector. Like, what does it look like? So it's interesting to think about, and I'm going to close my talk by discussing how that looks to me, at least. So we're used to mental health treatment, right, as being 20 years of talk therapy and pretty much a lifetime prescription to Wellbutrin, okay? But that's a Band-Aid, right? Talk therapy is sometimes not a Band-Aid, but sometimes it can be a Band-Aid if it goes on for 20 years with no profound change. So for lack of a better term, healing from psychedelics is a spiritual experience. That's a little different than talk therapy and Prozac. And in this spiritual experience, a light bulb goes off in the mind. And that light bulb is like an epiphany showing us how we are all connected and that we are all part of something bigger, right? This thing that we're connected through and to is this bigger thing, nature. Now, for some going through like an experience, an entheogenic experience, right? They perceive this thing that we're all connected to as itself kind of being conscious, like the Force in Star Wars, right? Or in Hawaii, they call it mana. It's an intelligent energy in nature, or in Buddhism, right? Chi, or in Hinduism, prana, and Christianity, the Holy Spirit, right? In indigenous cultures, they have similar concepts. It's always an intelligent flow. It's almost always fluidic, this flowing oneness. So I don't know what it is, and I don't even know what consciousness as a word means. And I don't even deeply know what spirituality means as a word. These are fluffy words that mean different things, quite frankly, to different people. But it is a very common thing for maybe 90% of people going through a fully intention, like when you really make it sacred, set intentions, maybe 90% or more of people experiencing these psychedelic experiences discuss this as a kind of spiritual experience. So, I envision a world just ahead of us in time where this psychedelic renaissance begin slowly at first to dissolve our long-standing mental and spiritual health crisis. And that's because I see it as both a crisis of the need for mental healing en masse. We talked about maybe the fact that most of us have subclinical PTSD, and 1 out of 4 of us has a clinically diagnosable mental disorder. But on top of this mental healing, right, this psychological healing en masse, what if there's also going to be a non-religious spiritual healing? Because what if there's a spiritual crisis as well as a mental crisis? And what if that spiritual awakening that's catalyzed or potentiated by the mainstreaming of psychedelics, what if that leads to a world of more tolerance, more empathy, right? And what if that's exactly what we need to solve the challenges that are driving us toward this Armageddon scenario? What if technology is not our saving grace? And what if it's the need of a spiritual awakening, right? That couples like yin and yang to a mental healing. So that's the world I see ahead of us, and I've never been more optimistic about it. Thank you.